You know, it sounds like, do you ever see this conflict being resolved in Western society?
No. Next question. The reason why is the conflict emerges out of those large-scale social changes. No matter how much money we spend on, quote, education, really what we're talking about is a fundamental shift in the way people interact with, experience, and view animals. They view them on an individual basis, where the animals have more or less a comparable treatment to other human beings. That doesn't translate well to modern animal agriculture, which by nature confines animals, alters natural systems expressly for human mass consumption. Those two are not reconcilable. And unless we change society and go back to a rural society, or unless we require kids to raise chickens from the hatchery all the way through killing them with their hands and cooking them, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, with the growing human population in the world, we need to look very seriously at how to most efficiently produce food. And I believe that actually growing plants instead of animals is really the most efficient way to get the most calorie per acre. So I think what we need to see is a shift towards more local plant production and away from the animal production that requires acres and acres to be planted for feed crops, and then also lots of land to dispose of the manure. So I think moving towards plants and away from animals is really the best way to deal with feeding our growing world population. I think the way that we're growing food now is actually quite inefficient. And rather than us growing food and then exporting it and taking it all over the world, ideally it would be nice if different countries were able to grow their own food. And so I think that we need to do a better job of producing food locally, and for consumers to be more in touch with farmers and their source of food. And I think that should happen globally. I'm not a fan of GMOs. I'm a fan of diversified genetic species, plants and animals. And I think that when we start messing too much with genetic codes, it concerns me. So I'm a proponent of growing plants locally and selecting seeds that do well in those areas. And I think over time, seeds that do well tend to flourish, and there's a fit. So I'm not a fan of GMO crops. I'm a fan of more local seed collection and use.
One last question here. You may have seen the United Nations FAO report saying that we are going to gain 2 billion people by 2050, and we're going to need to require increasing our food supply by 70%. Secondly, combined with that is there's a recent study in Kenya in 12 public schools where they did a controlled trial where a fourth of the children received meat as protein every day, another group milk, and then 2 traditional vegetable diets, similar to what a vegetarian would eat. The interesting thing was, after a year, the children that received the protein as meat gained 20 points on their cognitive skills over the other groups. They also had increased muscle activity, increased activity outside, and increased muscle mass. Where does that fit into all this thing that we talk about changing to a vegetarian society?
Well, that's a very sophisticated question. I'll answer it this way. We really have 2 tracks that appear unrelated. One is that as all cultures increase in affluence, demand for meat increases. So we see that across the board. As people become middle class and they have money, they want meat. One of those reasons is physiological. Meat is a very nice nutrient bank. It consolidates everything you need into a nice, neat little package without having to eat rice and legumes and beans. It does a very good job for amino acids, carbohydrate, fat, things like that. On the other hand, you have an expanding world population that has to be fed. Well, the animal rights folks would say the best way to feed an expanding world population is just feed more grain. Why have a 4-to-1 feed ratio with beef cattle, 2-to-1 with pigs, and 1-to-1 with, or 2-to-1 with chickens, and 3-to-1 with pigs, when you could just feed the grain directly to the people? See, that's where they're going to get that argument, is it's more economical and efficient just to plant more grain than waste it on animals. However, an argument we tested with consumers was this, and it's this simple. Animals take stuff that we can't eat and drink and turn it into stuff we can. And that's the message that consumers go, oh, I forgot that. That animal agriculture developed out of necessity, not convenience, and that's so that we could live in places like Antarctica and Florida and Ohio. We can feed grass and legumes to animals, and they convert it to something we can eat. They can drink water that's stagnant or infected that would kill us, convert it to usable products. The way we marry those two is animal agriculture actually takes things we can't use and turns them into things we can. And that's really an effective argument with consumers.
You know, we need to be creative about how we grow food, and there may be some land that we just don't use for food production, but the land that we do use is much more efficient and productive. I also see the possibility of community gardens in cities, people tearing up their lawns and putting in gardens. There's also some rooftop gardens now that exist in places like New York City. So there's a variety of smaller types of operations that are now starting to crop up, and I would love to see that trend to continue and actually to grow. Well, I think we need to look at genetic engineering very critically and assess when and if it fits. You know, if you have people that are starving and you can plant a crop that will feed those people, it seems like the right thing to do. But my concern would be in the long term. Then do we become dependent on a particular type of crop and on a particular type of pesticide, for example? And then do we have all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak? I'm concerned about the lack of genetic diversity that might grow from that approach. I think we need to be open-minded, but I think we need to look at each of these applications very critically. And I generally have a concern about GMOs, and I tend to favor more diversified local seed collection and use. But I think we need to be open-minded.
My sense is that when consumers want to know something about food, that hopefully the community that produces it will be willing to discuss and do so in a non-confrontational manner. Many times consumers will ask questions about production because of what they have learned from other places, and they're asking in a very innocent and knowledge-seeking way. And so hopefully, if we can improve our dialogue and learn to speak their language, that will have a better effect on how we go into the future with looking at sustainable production practices.
Down the Road is brought to you in part by Prince Agra, makers of Omnigen AF, advancing animal nutrition for healthy animals, and Woodruff Enterprise of Springfield, Ohio.